Welcome everyone to this very special webinar that Advaya is doing in collaboration with 10, the Emergence Network. I'm deeply, deeply honored to have these amazing speakers, Minna, Salami, and Bayou Akomolafe here. If anyone knows my writing, they know that these two people have been instrumental in my work and both personally and collectively have kind of shifted completely my worldview with their work. So I've been really transformed by you both. So thank you. I'm really honored to be here. Yeah, welcome everyone. I'm excited for you to be in conversation with these two amazing people. With this webinar, Tan and Advaya got together to explore rivers as metaphors, symbols of power, freedom, and ritual, which are the three themes. So this is the first of a three-part series that we're going to do. We wanted to explore rivers through both natural and human histories, and we've invited remarkable people to speak, two of whom are here. Yeah, to explore these themes, imagine ways of understanding rivers beyond kind of modern human-centered frameworks, but also letting river help us understand us.
A huge thank you to Vivi, to Sophie, to Erin, to Advaya and to Ten for organizing this event. It's really, I was just looking at all these courses you mentioned, and this really has become a community. So it's a true pleasure to be here. And then I want to thank all of you who have joined us today. It's wonderful to see so many people here. So thanks so much for coming along. And last but not least, I want to thank Bayou in advance, but also greet Bayou and just share that. Sorry, I just want to share that I have been in such a celebratory mood today because of this event. It's 7 o'clock here in Hamburg where I am. And the reason I've been in a celebratory mood is because, Bayou, you are not only my dear brother, but also a friend, and we haven't had a chance to be in conversation for a while. And so I am really looking forward to sharing this space. And maybe I want to first ask you how you're doing, because, I mean, what time? You're in India, I know that. And
good evening from India. And Minna, it is such a delight to be in conversation with you, sister, and to be in conversation with all our siblings here who are saying hello. And just so you all know, Minna and I share the context of being from the Yoruba people. And so we understand the gravity and weight of greeting each other well. So I just wanted to land that in there as I hold my sister in conversation and invite you all in with us to explore. All right, Minna, what are we going to do?
Great. And this was even still quite a short version of the Yoruba.
The abbreviated version of it, yeah.
Mindful of the time. And maybe in that vein, I would like to kick us off by asking you, Bayou, if you could share about your work and thinking around post-activism and parapolitics, so that we can get a kind of feeling of some of the key things that you've been working on, and maybe connecting it to the themes that we are exploring here tonight or today of power and rivers, if that.
Right. Thank you, sis. Well, the context for our conversation today is not some abstract, highfalutin philosophical, treatise. It is situated in a time when people are suffering, when we're asking questions about what it means to be human right now, when as I described it recently, the orange clouds of fascism are drifting across our landscapes. It seems like to talk, to speak, to breathe in these times, we need to think about how we think. We need to re-examine the assumptions that undergird the concepts we promote and we use. And And I think that's the reason why Minna and I are here to have this conversation. The concept of post-activism emerges from a multi-year, long-term wrestling with the notion of agency. And I could easily say that post-activism is the eruption of agency. But I want to situate it, I want to be able to situate it in a way that will land in your body as well, with a very short story. I promise you, I'm not going the Yoruba route and, and do a long version of that. Can I just do a very tiny story? So I land in Brazil and I'm snaking up. I've told this story before. I'm walking up to the immigration, the passport people, and I'm getting bored. So I'm on my phone for a while. I'm sending word home that I've landed in São Paulo safely. And then I put my phone away and I just start to notice people in general. Then out of nowhere, this woman comes cutting through the thing. I'm running out of words tonight because it's, like I said, it's 10:47 p.m. and my brain is misfiring. Whatever it is, she cuts through. She's running through the ropes, and I can feel my body tense, get really tense. And I start to square up. This is not a choice that I'm making, but I start to square up. And I noticed the German guy who is watching Netflix on his pad, as he's snaking up to the immigration table too. He starts to square up too. And we look at each other and it's almost like we're telling each other, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Right? Are we going to defend the integrity of this line and stop it from being invaded by this woman who we don't know? And she cuts towards us. And when she gets to us, I hear her say, I'm so sorry, but my son is just down the line and I need to catch up with him. And then I suddenly relax, right? I feel, of course, you can go, right? But in that moment, when this transversal cut happens, I notice that I'm no longer my own. And I've never been my own. In fact, I noticed the line, right? I noticed that I have been part of this larger organism, that I'm just an organelle in a larger snaking figure that is beheaded progressively at the end of the line. But yes, I'm part of an organism. And I was like a white blood cell, trying to defend the integrity of this organism. And I said to myself, my goodness, if I could just zoom out, of not just the line, but not just the airport, but to notice society broadly, I would probably notice that we all are part of larger territorial organisms, right? That the idea, the myth that we are singularly, individually agential, that we have agency, that we respond to the world in need, that we are doing all these things is totally disrupted by a post-humanist perspective that looks at us as part of a territory, as part of ecology, as part of furniture, intensity, thresholds, right? And that we're not our own, right? So post-activism comes from this post-humanist desire to resituate agency, not in the modernist, isolated individual Cartesian self, but in a larger body of acting, the large body, the diasporic body, the body that is ecological, right? So in that sense, not just resituating agency, it's about noticing agency for the first time. It's about noticing that sometimes the way we act in the world could be part of a larger architecture of behaving. And in that sense, we may, even with our good intentions, be reinforcing the very frameworks we're trying to escape from. So post-activism is the eruption that allows new forms of agency to take root. That is my soft landing here, because I really try to shy away from defining post-activism, but it's really a deterritorialization of the individual who claims to have agency, and a noticing of a broad multi-species arrangement in which agency is troubling, it's shared, it's diffracted, it's dispersed, it's differentiated. And in that sense, it asks us, what do we do with this?
I mean, the first is just how much what you're saying resonates, and your experience at the airport reminded me of an incident, which I will also share very, very shortly, but of getting caught in a stampede some years ago. I was at a festival in London called the Wireless Festival, and all of a sudden, trying to move from one stage to another, I suddenly realized that I was no longer controlling my body. I was just part of this larger body of all the festival goers. And eventually I end up at the very front of the gate just as it collapses, and all these bodies, fall on top of me. And it was kind of a near death experience, not a very pleasant one, but really this sense of losing any idea of that individual, I am me and I can do what I want. That feeling was completely taken away in that moment. And there's something very true, I think it's symbolical of really the way that, power works, and also our attempts to transform power, which is what historically and conventionally we think of activism as doing, right? So the thought, the kind of follow-up question that I have for you is,
yes, sister,
what kind of register might this attempt to transform power relations, what we typically would have thought of as an individual agent acting with other individual agents, yes, in a post-activist spirit, it easily leans into some kind of asking you to define what you mean, which is not what I want to do, but...
Yes, sister, yeah. I hear you. I hear you about the registers, but to reiterate what I've just, clumsily shared about post-activism in airports and lines and organelles and transversal ladies, maybe I would say that the invitation of post-activism is to notice that agency or action could very well become, especially countercultural action or counterinsurgent action or resistance, can very often become an aspect of colonial relations, right? We might think that we're doing something against something or in support of one position that we have, but in an entangled world, in a world that is biopolitical, in a world that is infrapolitical, in a world where the lines are constantly shifting, it is very easy to be against something and still be entangled with the thing that you're against. In fact, resistance can emerge within an arrangement, a series of accommodations, only to reinforce the logic of that arrangement, right? If I were some kind of sci-fi reptilian overlord that has taken over the human race, sorry, it's my brain again, right? What I would do to keep my population docile is to invite resistance, is to actually promote protest, is to suggest that you can take me down. I'm making myself available for critique. The question then is, especially from African perspectives and our experiences, the people growing up in Africa, people who are rooted in that continent and in the struggle for independence, we learned the hard way that victory is too risky, right? That sometimes if our goal is to win, we've already lost the plot. So, I mean, the converse here, the invitation of post-activism is to frame a parapolitics, which I will not get into at the moment, but just to say that if the goal is not to win, maybe the goal is to render winning incoherent. right? It's not to win the trophy. It's not that field, the theater of drama, of actors, of resistance may actually keep the mechanism intact, right? And I don't care at the moment where the pendulum swings. I just want to say that the mechanism does not care. It's not scandalized how the pendulum swings. I want out of the clock. And that's where the parapolitics comes in. Post-activism is the noticing of agential eruption, of noticing, oh my goodness, I'm not my own. I've actually been in service of things that are beyond me, right? Despite my good intentions. Then parapolitics is the carnivalesque field that invites us to improvise fiercely in the wake of our eruption, right? And it swims with notions of how we know, of how we feel, of how we think, and all these things. It's onto-epistemological, it is moralistic, it is ethical, it is aesthetic, it's many of these things. Which brings me to a question about sensuous knowledge, because you write about sensuous knowledge, you write about Black feminism, you write about flowing and riverine qualities. How do we read these things together? What is emergent for you, sister? Sensuous knowledge.
Thank you. And thank you for expanding those reflections. I'll probably connect what I'm saying to what you just said.
Right.
It really aligns with how I also am thinking about activism and resistance.
Mm-hmm.
But first, yes, let me share about sensuous knowledge. It's the title of a book that I wrote in about 5 years ago. It's funny because the topic matter that has preoccupied me pretty much all of my life, but certainly since I became an adult. I did my dissertations, both my bachelor's, my master's. Like it has been power. I am obsessed with power, not having it, but understanding it. And the reason that I am obsessed and preoccupied with power is because the way that it is defined has impacted not only my life, but very specifically thinking about ourselves as not only as individuals, but as part of this larger flow or entity. Power has so negatively and adversely impacted women and people of African heritage, speak less of women of African heritage, or power as we have defined it, let's say. So this has been like a continuing thread throughout my life that I've wanted to be able to really put my finger on, like, how is it that we have defined power, and why is it having these impacts of causing so much suffering, in the world and around us. And it was during this exploration that I came to understand that the definings of power are just briefly, first of all, as I see it, the conventional understanding of power is that we connect it to the state. So, military, parliament, all of these state institutions. It's also something that we think of as synonymous with terms like coercion and control and domination and violence, which, are very different things as I have come to see it. And then thirdly, we see power as something that we can quantify. So it's something that, is typically thought of as we can measure it, and therefore we can also accumulate it, of course. And so having identified that this is the destructive, these are some of the parameters of the destructive ways we think about power, I nevertheless came to understand that to, quote unquote, resist these definitions, these understandings, it wasn't really a question of resisting, it was a question of knowing. It was a question of being. So it was ontological, epistemological, and embodied. And even to an extent, you could say spiritual. Those were the realms in which some kind of shift or transformation needed to happen. And the more I mulled over that is kind of the seed for sensuous knowledge, which in some sense I realize now was the way that I had always understood both knowledge and power, coming from a Yoruba background. And of course, we also have our characters in this
the Orisha
the Orisha, but I meant to say that in this blob that we are a part of, where we are not egos and individuals, but we nevertheless have our unique traits, right? And so this has just always kind of been my way of approaching the world, is what I to describe as sensuous knowledge. And so I'll talk later about, because through sensuous knowledge, I came to coin a term called exusions,
yes,
which is specifically about power and rivers, but we can go into that later. What I first wanted to say is just this thing about resistance that you were speaking about in activism. I want to respond to that briefly, because I think even my field or my intellectual tradition that I'm coming from is feminism. And even in so much feminist work today, feminist activism, I notice how there's this desire to create something that's palatable and full of certainty. I'm in so much, opposition, or not even opposition is too strong a word. I just cannot do dogma, or what eventually becomes a kind of plasticity or something like ideological thinking. And I think that this has really permeated activism so much today. And it's really important that we shift away from that, because of course, activists are people with the best of intentions. And to some extent, you and I are, some people would call us activists. So it's not, I'm not saying this with any kind of disdain or anything like that, but we really need to rethink activism. And so I really, therefore, resonate and appreciate so much what you're bringing up. But maybe you can now share if anything has come up for you, but also speak to.
I wanted you to say a little bit more about this plasticity you're speaking about, by which I think you meant to invoke a kind of theatrical, performative proximity to power as is currently envisioned in our social spaces, right? And you use this word again, some kind of ideological. You use the word dogma, actually, right? So something dogmatic and ideologically certified or certifiable, a kind of discipline of some kind. And I'm wondering if you can exemplify that, and if we can courageously go into speaking about what that looks like. What is it you're seeing, sister, that feels trapped in itself, and what does it invite for you? Is this a way of speaking about this exuberance that you're speaking about? What is invited here for you?
Thank you. Maybe I'll start with saying the kind of feminist work that I am drawn to and that I myself seek to produce and is a kind of thinking and being and doing which is probing, searching, disturbing, dealing with uncertainty, unknowability, mystery, acknowledging, seeing it, being aware that this is, our ontological reality. So what I'm seeing instead in so much of the discourse, which I think it's very understandable, in these, with, the advent of the internet and social media and then further polarization, but everyone, including, sadly, many activist spaces and also feminist spaces, have been so much influenced by what I call Euro-patriarchal knowledge, which is a way of thinking that demands certainty, quantification, this kind of robotic thinking. And so precisely as you said, that when we are resisting, we are doing the work that the oppressor wants, because we end up reinforced. So a lot of feminist work today is resisting by using the same methodology. So creating certainties, that feminism works exactly, you know, like ABC. And there's a lot of rules and dogma and ideological thought.
Yeah, you go.
And the more we produce that, eventually what I meant by the plasticity is that it becomes meaning. It becomes, you know, the depth, the searching, probing nature of knowledge is lost because it's just plastic object that no longer means anything. And we need to really protect our movements from becoming plastic.
That dances with what we're saying earlier, that you can be assiduously against something. You could be anti this and anti that and still be part of its logic, right? You could be anti-racist. You could be anti-racist and still participate in the retaining of whiteness as the shape of experience, right? You could be anti-whiteness. In fact, I would argue that whiteness produces anti-whiteness. Whiteness invites it, and it creates the space for it. It says, be against me, kill me. What it does not want you to notice is that it is incomplete, right? That coloniality works by portraying completeness, by displaying a totalized presence, right? What it does not want you to see is that it has edges, that it is breathing, that it is subject to the elements. And so, yes, it seems that our efforts to resist, to push back on, just like trying to lean on a wall, we take on the shape of that which we resist so strongly, right?
Yeah, what you're saying reminds me actually of your wonderful book. I forget now the exact title about
Me too, I forget.
Black Lives Matter movement. But you write in that, you talk about the DEI, you know, diversity, equality, inclusion, which of course, you know, now given the orange energies, it seems almost like a radical idea, but I think that was one example perhaps of, you know, whiteness doing anti-whiteness, because so much of DEI initiatives were, of course, you know, funded and backed by organizations that are also champions of quote unquote whiteness.
It's how power works, right? In its disappearing, it proliferates. It's just like we're having conversations today about anarchy, right? Anarchy is, let's take it down, blow that pipeline and all of that. You could storm the Bastille and still retain the stage of the Bastille, right? You could remove the king and still preserve the throne. And that's a lot of what is happening in the field today, where our efforts recreate the conditions for the logic to thrive differently. Right? And that's why I constantly speak about cracks. It's my way of conceptualizing breaks from the logics that incarcerate us in a repetitive pattern of just proliferating a certain kind of experience, right? And maybe this is the invitation to see power then as not the property of that person or that institution, but power as fundamentally incomplete, fundamentally provisional, fundamentally fugitive, always moving, right? And if the Anthropocene is about anything, it must be that power is not as scarce as we think it is, that it is moving, it is migrant.
So while I was writing Sensuous Knowledge and still being preoccupied with power, I was simultaneously traveling a lot and spending a lot of time by rivers, which is something that I do anyway. I love rivers. I'm a water person, so whenever I travel somewhere, the first thing I do is where's the closest, you know, body of water, and I go there. And at one point, I was by a river somewhere, and the question appeared in my mind that what can rivers teach us about power? And around that time, I had come across the ancient Greek word for power, which is exousia. As the rivers started to respond to this question that I had posed them in their own way, it kind of melded with this word exousia, and that was where the term exusions came to me as a term which I could use to reimagine and reshape understanding. And what I learned from rivers is precisely this migrant, flowing, all-encompassing thing that power is. So when you think about the way that a river just starts as a tiny water drop somewhere up in some mountain, and if you just think about that, and then it drops, and then it is joined by other water drops, the immense power that is then created as these water drops together become streams and tributaries, and they join each other, and they're together yearning to reach the ocean ultimately. And watching rivers, because I then started to watch like endless YouTube clips of rivers, just different types of rivers, and learning like they're so alive and they have such different characteristics and characters. They're really, really temperamental in different ways. And I could see that what they teach us about power is that no matter the obstacles, because rivers, of course, are burdened with so many man-made obstacles, dams, pollution, this, that, wars, so much of our politics and conflicts are to do with rivers specifically. Yet they move their way toward the ocean, they move beyond, above, below, sideways, they join forces, and they get to the damn ocean. And there's such a lesson there that power is, it's gravity, right? That's the scientific explanation for what is happening. But what I would say is that power is to humans what gravity is to rivers. So in the way that the river is going toward the ocean and it is joining forces to achieve its goal, the human species, as we are a sibling to rivers in the natural world, power is when I think I kind of like Abraham Maslow's idea that, the end. Sorry.
I'm leaving this conversation.
No,
I'm just kidding. But Abraham Maslow, okay, go ahead, sister. I'm kidding with the.
I think this pyramid of needs, I find it useful to think with anyway. And the idea that, some self-actualization is something that we, he says something like a musician must play music, an artist must paint. I think we need to become who we are. It's a kind of individuation process. And I think power is the force that, it's kind of the willpower, it's just something that is. But just to close off with this, is that with the river, in the same way that the tributaries and streams join forces to get to the ocean, once the river reaches the ocean, it branches. If you look at aerial views, the branches sort of individuate. It's like the water drop that initially joined forces becomes itself. And so that's where I saw this correlation to a kind of individuation process. And actually, the last thing I'll say is that I came to define this kind of branching quality of, or I came to think of it as the grammar of power. And if you look at all natural elements, including our bodies, we all have these branching dendritic patterns within us. We see thunder, we see it in fish, we see it everywhere. I think that is the grammar of power, this desire to be alive, to become, to actualize.
I like that. It's really, I hear this pull of resonance, especially when I speak about panraism. It's my word for everything flowing. Panraic is a PANRHEIC. both of us are grapho compulsive, as we know. We have to write, and sometimes the words, yes, 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 glossaries are the words have to be made because they're it's not made yet, right? And so endorheic systems and exorheic systems describe patterns of inflow and outflow in already stabilized water bodies. But when we refuse to stabilize anything, when we peel back the affordances, the luxury of stability, of settling things, then we notice that everything flows. And it's what you're saying. Like panraic means all flowing, right? It's what you're saying about power. By not starting, you're basically saying, I hear you saying, that don't start from the thing that has power, right? Don't look at the emblematic figure of power. You have to look at the tiny drop and its migritude and its journey through the desert and its wandering through ecologies, and how all of these wanderings and meanderings and lines of flight creates the accommodation field that we rudely call power. But it's also your way of saying power is not as stable as we think it is. And we cannot stabilize it in any final way. If you stabilize it, then you will be thinking through the lenses of coloniality, because coloniality is the effort to stabilize power and to enlist bodies to perform power as if it were stabilized, right? And we all stabilize powers, even with resistance, we stabilize power. There was this strange, very strange series called OA on Netflix. There was this scene, sister, where they were in a cell, and the effort was, of course, when you're in a jail cell, the thing is to try to get out of the jail cell. But then I don't want to spoil it because I know that some of our siblings here are from regions of the world where spoilage is a huge sin. So I'm not going to spoil it. But the thing was, you have to dance to this choreography. This choreographed practice is a crack. And to perform it as a ritual is to leave the circumstances of coloniality, right? So everyone else was basically trying to get out of the jail cell, but a faction, if I could remember correctly, of the prisoners in this jail cell knew that if you try to get out of the jail cell, you will be committing yourself to the geometry of that jail cell. Because even escape from the circumstances of penury, of poverty, of incarceration is our commitment to incarceration, ironically, right? So the invitation then is what is liquid about solidity? What is flowing even about fascism, right? How does fascism leak? How does it spill? How does it slip past its own algorithms? We could ask the same about money, about power. How does money betray its own algorithms? How does light fail to commit itself to illumination, right? So the rivers speak to me of leakages, a world that is constantly leaking, that cannot be held bound by any one ideology or faith or system or claim to power.
Precisely. Yes, I think this is the language of rivers is lends itself so well. Yeah, I mean, we could call it maybe riverine language. You know, it really speaks to, and that's what I was trying to conjure with the way that they move beyond obstacles. Because
yes.
I mean, of course, many rivers have died, sadly, and many more are suffering, and rivers do get ill. But
yes.
in some way, they also laugh at this human attempt to harness the power of rivers, you know, which of course we have done. Like we used to worship them, and now we instead destroy them. But they also laugh at that attempt by, you know, create these massive floodings, for instance, that rivers produce, and the way in which they do ultimately arrive at their destination, no matter what obstacles we put in their way. But what you're saying about these slippages and cracks and you know, the kind of the presence of the trickster, fascism, even in capitalism and finance, makes me think of how we because we are not separate from nature, and because all of our constructs are part of nature, so fascism
Yes.
is part of nature.
There you go. There you go.
And so these are all sort of mirrorings of what is happening elsewhere. And this is not any kind of answer that should produce lucidity. It's something to dance with and play with. We can understand these phenomena better if we can understand ourselves as a part of nature, and if we see that everything that is happening with the climate emergency is reflected back in our constructs, in our bodies. You know, the reason, the fact that so many more people are suffering from anxiety, say, or having nightmares, is a indirect relationship with what is happening with other parts of nature. Polarization is happening because we are creating all of these barriers and divides in the natural. We're exploiting our world as if it were a warehouse. I think that is the territory where we might be able to, in an embodied way, feel the cracks, feel the thing that is not the prison. You know, Audre Lorde's famous line of "the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house." I now see so clearly that what we are being urged to do, when she made that paradoxical statement, is to build another house or another kind of edifice, whatever, you know. But the way that activists and, you know, the general discourse around this statement of Audre Lorde's has always been like to discuss, so what tools will dismantle the master's house? Which one is the master? But the point is, no, the master's house will always be the master's house, no matter what tools we use. We need to get out of that house and do something else.
I would suggest then, quite conspiratorially, that getting out of the house is not just making it for the exit, right? Because the exit is already anticipated, right? The exit is already part of the blueprint, right? I would be suspicious of an exit in the master's house, right? Because then it will be permission for the master's house to continue, right? The house is not just a solid thing isolated in space-time. The house is a practice, and a practice is always flowing, right? This is the invitation, a cultivation of our sensitivities, not to see things as these independent structure-like things. We're post-structuralist here, I would presume, all of us together. We're doing post-structuralist philosophical work, because a house is not just the house. The house is the materials that made the house. The house is the geo-philosophical and geosomatic and geo-physical space that made the house possible. The house is the weather. So the house is all these ecologies of practice. So leaving the house then becomes really a matter of not just leaving the solid object, but finding how those interactions create modules, spaces that are unanticipated by the system that claims to own them, right? So the reason why I speak about crack, sister, is I feel every body, and all bodies are flowing failures to form. I'll say that again, that maybe I'll put it this way. All bodies are failures to fully form. Right? That is, bodies are never fully finished. The idea that they are finished, they're complete, is the master's thesis, right? The river's thesis is that bodies are constantly spilling, even when we don't think they are. When modernity claims to close up its walls and that it knows the way forward, it will spill in other ways, maybe by grief, literally with tears coming out from our eyes, and us trying to pathologize those tears. When we get so busy and we're not even sure what to do any longer, we will spill with overwhelm. We will always spill. Spillage is how the world proliferates itself. And that's why speaking about rivers is almost like speaking about God itself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We need another language to realize that the exit is not where we want to go.
Yes.
Otherwise, we are heading for the exit, and the exit is a trap. So
I needed us to say a few things, Minna, about these moments, right? The public intellectual must bleed in these times. If we're not bleeding, spilling, slipping, leaking in some way, in these times of pain in the Middle East, where people do not want to wake up in the United States because of what's happening, what do you say from your heart, sister, to those of us who are gathered because we all are in the pain together, we're suffering? What is happening? What do you say to this moment?
I say that to understand the seriousness of this moment, precisely what you have said, I can only repeat and reinforce that the public intellectual, indeed, I want to say all of us, but as public intellectuals, you know, we are wearing that mantle because we have chosen to, we feel compelled to, we have been chosen maybe even by some force other than ourselves. And I believe so strongly that it is a huge responsibility right now, which is why I maybe would say that this impulse to, because both you and I, we speak in these poetic, metaphorical terms, we invoke natural elements, the Yoruba traditions, and I know that you will not stop doing that, and I won't. But there's an impulse sometimes for people to hone in on those, you know, more flowery, lyrical sides. And I want people to understand that this work comes from, I know it is the same for you, my brother, that it comes from, it's a life or death question.
Yes.
Comes from a place of pain. We are not playing around. I mean, there's joy and rapture, and all of that matters. But this is a question of survival, and we need new language. We need shifts, ontological shifts. We need those of us who have not been allowed to make meaning, to do beauty. We need our languages to be heard. So yeah, that's what how do you, maybe you can.
Thank you, sister. That's so beautiful. We need to do beauty. And the way that I sense beauty happens is that beauty is not usually comely. Beauty is not usually beautiful. I'll put it that way. That it doesn't always come garbed or decked or decorated in the comely, harmonious ways that we're used to. Turns out that sometimes grace shows up as the monster, as the thing that is readily pathologized, as the thing we want to get rid of, because modernity is the habituated pattern or practice of flattening beauty, of flattening the monster, just so we can get through with the chokehold experiences of privilege and convenience for the modern subject. And I feel at this time that in those spaces, and cracks, in my view, show up in psychosomatic ways. They are invitational. Not all cracks are invitational. Some are too fine to be perceivable. But cracks show up. And when they show up, they will show up as the things we don't like, as a sense of overwhelm, as exhaustion, as a sense of hopelessness, as what do we do with this moment? My siblings, maybe what I would say is, don't fall for the ruse, for the temptation to swing the pendulum back in our favor, right? It's what Martin Luther King noticed in 1968, right? What if we're integrating into the burning house? It's what Issue noticed at the shores of the transatlantic slave trade, basically saying to his Orisha siblings that maybe victory is too risky. And my sense of things now is that victory is too risky. We have to go and descend into the ground and practice and improvise and experiment and notice that power is misbehaving too.
moment to share the practice. I really believe so. I mean, we could talk for hours and hours, but
Let's do that. Minna, let's take turns reading it together?
perfect.
Okay, so this is a gift from us to y'all, okay? Minna.
Power is often stabilized in modernizing practices as invested in specific institutions, individuals, and informational arrangements, as a property only a few have access to. However, in a changing world where new technologies challenge human claims to cognitive exclusivity, where geographical conveniences afford some nation states significant resource advantages in the rupturing infrastructure of the rules-based international order, and where the role of gut bacteria in shaping social decisions and power is now increasingly recognized.
Beyond the questions of who has power and who doesn't, our sense is that power is irreducibly relational, indebted to shifting accommodations, never fully realized, provisional, contested, speculative, and inseparable from ecologies and movements beyond the human. So here's our invitation then for you. I'll read this paragraph. It's a long prompt, but it is framed and written with care. I'll read this paragraph and then my sister will close us off with the final paragraph, okay? Here's our invitation. To touch the shape of your overwhelm. Touch the shape of your overwhelm. For the moment, we are reconstituting overwhelm not as pathology, not as something to fix, but as those infra-thin moments when the more than human world presses itself against the skin of human sociality. When a business meeting gets interrupted by the scurrying rudeness of a passing cockroach. When a blueprint or book grows moss. When the road arched its back and resisted full passage beneath the taming machinery of your vehicular privileges. Sister.
Gather with two others in your life and tell stories of your overwhelm, inspired by the examples above. When the world crossed you out, keep telling these stories as you recount them. Whenever your shared storytelling session is saturated, create an altar of some kind, digital, diffracted, distant, crooked, whatever, that honors this crossing out, this situated overwhelm. Your feral improvisations may open up possibilities for noticing that power is strange and not as domesticated as the modern thinks.
Touch the shape of your overwhelm. That is our invitation to you. Do it at home, do it in the shopping mall, do it everywhere. Just find a way to touch it and share this touching with others. Minna, it's been wonderful speaking with you, sister.
Oh,
Such a delight, truly, really.
thank you so, so much. I also love this prompt. And I think my gathering is, I loved the idea of coloniality being trying to control power or trying to tame power, amongst many other amazing things that you said, both of you. So thank you so, so much. This has been transformative for me. And I can't wait to do this practice. I already have invited a few friends because I did get to see the practice before. So I'm going to do an intentional gathering to touch our overwhelm and maybe interpret it, maybe by dancing or drawing or I don't know. Thank you both so, so much. And thank you everyone for coming. I wanted to ask a few questions from the crowd. We don't have a lot of time, but maybe we have space for a few questions. Because a lot was written in the chats, I cannot scroll back, so I've written them down. And someone wrote, what does fluidity look like within a system of power? What does it look like within a hierarchical structure, within a pyramidal structure, a wave? So
I'll just say quickly, hierarchy is fluidity pretending to be immobile. Right? Flow is not the opposite of hierarchy or structure. It's that everything is fluid, even structure, even fascism, even the thing that is seemingly immobile, it's flowing, right? So fluidity is not within the system. Fluidity is the system temporarily stabilized.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is because fluidity is the system, to not in any way fixate or try to understand it. Like these are not, sort of puzzles to solve. Our minds are so habituated in wanting to, answer the question, how? And maybe what I would say fluidity does is, if we're asking any question, it's why. Why should fluidity change in a hierarchical system? Like always asking that question, why, is a way, I think, to touch the overwhelm.
I also feel that thinking of power in this way, or thinking of fluidity in this way, for me personally, it takes away some of the fears that emerge when we see what's going on, and we kind of calcify what's going on now as it will stay forever. It won't. Nothing will. And power is moving, and hopefully it moves in the right direction. I think it's just kind of like, yeah, I love that. And so there's another question. How do we choose to act if we see the world as liquid and is always shifting?
If you start from the subject that chooses to act, you're already late, right? It's it's too late. Folks, it's not, and I'm not saying this is exactly what my dear sibling is saying, but I hear these questions often when I speak about maybe some entanglement or something. People might say, then, how do I become more entangled, with the world? It's not like it's a bridge you have to cross eventually. There's nothing to do. It doesn't start with choice. You don't choose to relate in a world that is flowing. It's that even your question is flowing. It's flow, right? So the thing then is to frame conversations around the slippages, around spillage and leakage, and to ask ourselves, what then is possible in a world that is constantly flowing, that congeals often into stability? To say that the world flows is not to deny that structures exist, but structures are forms of flow, right? Flows can stabilize, can become carceral. Care can become asphyxiation, right? It's just a way of noticing that the relations, the practice that make for certain stabilizing, settling colonial realities are also forms of flow, right? And which kind of invites me to respond to this idea of power over and power, that those are certain forms of accommodation, right? Power over definitely exists, but it is indebted to a form of accommodation. And accommodation is a field of practice, a viscosity of relations within bodies that makes bodies as it goes along, right? It is never complete. Power over is provisional. It exists. We're not denying it, but it is provisional.
I think that this question of power over, and then there's, of course, also power to is another phrase that we connect with power, which is more empowering than power over, and then power with. But I think all of these kind of phrases are still compartmentalizing power. So power with is something more like, solidarity, collaboration. So it's positive, but it's not quite power. I think what I want to say is power is, it just is. And maybe that also is a way to respond to that question of how we would be acting with liquidity, which is, I want to say, just love. I know that's a bit cheesy, but, because it's the only way to say it without becoming, trying to create a specific linear type of methodology. And because love, like power, just is, and so the more we can grasp that some things just are, and our need to put them into neat definitions is the need to control them. And as long as we need to control, we are, of course, executing power over, rather than just the purest kind of form of power, which is the same as the purest form of love at the end of the day.
Mm.
That's so true. Thank you so, so much for being here, and thank you, everyone.